I bought in the wrong neighborhood and it cost me over $20,000. And in this video, I'm going to tell you exactly what happened as well as give you some clear guidelines on how you can choose the right location when buying your first rental. That way you don't end up like me buying a property that ends up not having enough housing demand to even fill it. So let me get started off with a concept that originated in the field of design. In design, there's a concept called form fits function. This is important because how well a product is designed determines how well it works. And this concept basically means that if you take a look at an object, you can intuitively tell what it's used for based off of just its form. So for example, if you take a cup, you can look at it and say, this probably holds liquids. And in real estate, the best way to apply this concept is to say that where you buy ultimately determines what type of tenant that you get. Think about it. If you buy in a rough neighborhood, what we call a Class C or a Class D neighborhood, and you try to put in a highly paid tech engineer into that property, it's just not going to work. The tech engineer is going to take a look at the crime rates and say, heck no, I'm not going to stay there. I'd rather pay much more to live in a safe neighborhood. And let's say I do end up buying in a Class C or a Class D neighborhood, I probably will have a much higher likelihood of getting non-payment of rent and having to deal with an eviction. So I actually did make the mistake of buying in the wrong neighborhood. Luckily, it wasn't a Class C or D neighborhood. However, it was so far from anything of significance that nobody wanted to rent it out because it was far away from schools, it was far away from transport, far away from hospitals, and far away from the great restaurants in the area. So after several months of it being vacant, I finally found a group of construction workers who were flying in from Texas to complete a construction property nearby the house. Unfortunately, soon after they moved in, I found out that they put over 14 people into that property that only had 7 bedrooms. And this was completely without my permission. The neighbors complained that there were so many cars in the area, and then they complained to the city, and then the city slapped down heavy fines onto me and forced me to make the construction workers leave. Then the property sat vacant for another couple of months until I eventually had to sell it and lost over $20,000 in that short time span, just from those extended vacancies and the city fines. So now I start off my journey with asking myself, who is my tenant avatar? Basically, who is my ideal tenant and what real estate strategy will I be using? Going back to form fits function, I have to figure out what's the function of my rental. And then that will determine where I'm going to buy. For example, let's say I do Airbnb. That means I probably want to be nearby top vacation spots, maybe a beach or nearby the mountains. However, instead, if my strategy is to rent out to travel nurses, I typically will want to be nearby larger hospitals with 400 beds or more so that I can really find that type of clientele. Now, if you want to do student housing like I do, you want to use the 1 mile rule, which basically states that you want to be within 1 mile of a top college. Now, a lot of people get into student housing because it makes great cash flow. This allows you to grow much faster and in turn allows you to replace your W-2 income completely from just a handful of high cash flowing student rentals. When I started off, I ended up buying nearby my alma mater college where I went to pharmacy school and I rented out to professional school students, which eventually grew into a multiple 6-figure rental portfolio in a pretty short amount of time span and allowed me to retire from pharmacy. Now, I found some interesting things about this particular tenant avatar, which is college students. They care about 3 main things. The first is proximity to campus, which we went over the 1 mile rule. The second thing they care about is how safe your neighborhood is. And then the last thing they care about is how affordable your house is. So when you're thinking about where to buy, you really want to take your ideal tenant, and ask yourself, what are they looking for in the area that you're looking to buy in? And a lot of times, safety is one of the most important things they're looking for. For example, I had a student who got confused about what exact street I was on. She thought I was on Church Street when I was actually on Churchill Street, which are completely different areas and completely different crime rates. She was adamant that my area was super unsafe until I explained to her exactly where my property was located. Then she realized her mistake and wanted to see my property right away. That's how important safety is a lot of times. And even if the neighborhood that you're actually in is safe, but the public perception of the neighborhood you're in says that it's unsafe, people will believe the public perception over what you have to say about it. So what I usually do is I go to Reddit to figure out what areas people are talking about as safe versus unsafe. The next lesson that I learned is that when you buy a property, you're not just buying that property, you're buying the era that that neighborhood was built in. Let me explain. I bought my first property in a neighborhood that was built in the 1920s, and boy, it had a lot of problems with it. I had a cast iron sewage pipe, which was a common material in houses built before the 1980s. And what happened is I had tree roots that stuck into the pipe and actually cracked and broke the entire pipe in half. And what happened is all this sewage was coming out of my kitchen sink and all over the kitchen floor. And I got a call from the tenant saying, dude, you guys got to clean this up as soon as possible. So it was a really gross mess and a painful bill I had to pay. It cost me over $9,000. Also, houses built in the 1920s in that neighborhood didn't have any AC. So I got a call from my tenant and he said, oh, it's 100 degrees outside and my room literally has personal items that I have that are melting, like solid to liquid melting. And they told me that they had to hang out in the living room right now because they didn't want to get heat stroke. So when I heard that, I felt really bad about it. And I had to install a brand new mini split AC system, which cost me $15,000 to put in. Not only that, but because I didn't actually have the money for it, I had to borrow money from my father and pay him an interest rate, which I felt guilty about, in order to cover the expenses. So how can you avoid buying houses in the wrong era? So I'll go ahead and give you a simplified approach to this. It's not 100% accurate, keep that in mind. So basically I'll go to Zillow.com and I'll set the filter, the age filter, to be 1940s or newer. That way I don't have to replace a lot of older systems before I even buy the house. Let me give you another example of something else to watch out for. So I bought this house that was in an older era as well, and it had something what we call knob and tube electricals, which they apparently used in that specific region when the houses in that neighborhood were built. Now, knob and tube, unfortunately, carries a higher risk of fire occurrences. So a lot of home insurance companies won't even insure knob and tube, even though that was the primary material that was used building those houses at that time. And so what I had to do was I called over 20 home insurance companies to get home insurance on that property in order to close on it. And that was extremely painful. So make sure you figure out what era your neighborhood was built in, because that usually determines what type of materials are used, and therefore what systems may need to be upgraded before you even buy that property. The last thing I'll leave you with is this fact: rent growth follows job growth. So you basically want to buy in cities that have increasing population size and increasing job opportunities. For example, in Austin, Texas, Tesla announced that they were building a gigafactory. And very soon after that, that area saw a huge increase in rents and home prices. So make sure you read the news and look at city data. And if the population is growing and the job opportunities are increasing, there's a very strong likelihood that if you buy in that city, you're going to experience rent increases and increase in the home price of your property. So hopefully you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe and share it with those who are really struggling with getting started in real estate investing. Thank you again for watching, and I will see you on next week's video.